Take a pie chart and look at the U.S. consumption of coal is about 10% of the world's consumption. That matches up with Matt's metrics he just shared. Said another way, 90% of the world's coal is consumed outside the United States. And the question is, are we going to cede the leadership in clean coal technology to the Chinese or to India rather than letting America lead that debate and lead that technology and lead this innovation, which I think from both an economic and environmental stewardship viewpoint, it's better when America leads. The world is cleaner, the world is safer. And I think that's one of these policy debates we need to have in terms of trying to find a balance on this discussion. I was struck by another stat or point that Matt just made. He said the permitting process has become a weapon to stop some of these export terminals. You know, you think back on the big picture on the numbers, the United States represents 4% of the world's consumers. 4%. Now, in terms of purchasing power, more than that, but looking at lengthening the horizon, thinking the next 10, 20, 30 years as purchasing power of the consumers outside the United States continues to increase, 96% of the world's consumers are not in the United States. And if we're going to get our Montana products, our ag products, our energy products to market, we've got to have the infrastructure and the ability to get that stuff across the water. And that's been a real issue. We've been involved in this fight in the Gateway Pacific Terminal, which is located in a spot that's already zoned for a terminal. There's a terminal to the north, there's a terminal to the south as you stand there literally on the water shore. And we're caught up right now in a pretty big battle with the state of Washington, with some of the folks there in the Army Corps. But stay tuned to that one, as we need this infrastructure to get Montana products out to the expanding global markets. Well, we're going to have a panel come up now, and as I introduce the panel, I'd ask this panel to start making the way forward, if you will, the panel on infrastructure. That's Cary, Colby, Tom, and Michael. You know who you are. Please come forward as I start this introduction. So this panel is about investing in the future and related to infrastructure. It ties right into what Matt shared as we think about rail and expanding the thinking there. In order for Montana to realize its potential, our investment in infrastructure is critical to the success and future of our energy industry. Our electric grid needs constant improvements to be resilient in the face of cybersecurity threats and to be able to keep the lights on in an affordable way for Montana and American families. Energy security is national security, and it's important for robust pipe and rail system and resilient transmission to keep Montana energy safely transporting fuels and affordable energy. You know, we've also have an incredible opportunity to continue and expand exporting made in Montana energy with sound infrastructure. We don't have an ocean shore in Montana. We depend on getting our products to ports to get them overseas. So I'd like to welcome our moderator, Cary Hegreberg. He's the Executive Director of the Montana Contractors Association. As a son of a contractor, I appreciate what he does. And our panelists, we have Colby Tanner, the Assistant Vice President, Economic Development for BNSF. We have Tom Walsh, the President and CEO of Montana Rail Link, and Michael Cashel, Vice President Transmission for NorthWestern Energy. Please give a warm welcome to this panel. Cary, take it away.
Thank you very much, Senator Daines. It's really a pleasure for me to be here. It's kind of odd to stand here with all these bright lights. You really can't see anybody out in the audience. It's really an honor for the Montana Contractors Association to have been part of this event now. This will be the third time the Montana Energy Conference has been held here in Billings. We were one of the initial organizations that put it together. It got a little bigger than we could really handle, and we are elated that Senator Daines decided that this would be something that he and his staff would like to perpetuate into the future. And again, I work for the Montana Contractors Association. We're a chapter of the Associated General Contractors of America. Here in Montana, our member companies build the stuff that other industries decide they need to construct to make their companies and their industry more profitable. You know, I heard a story about this guy who was riding his Harley Davidson going to the Sun Highway here last summer, and the clouds parted, and all of a sudden the Lord spoke to him. And he said, "You've been a fine man, you've been a good person," and he said, "I'm going to grant you one wish." And the man pulled his bike over, and he thought about it, and he said, "Lord, I wish for a bridge to Hawaii." And the Lord said, "That is a materialistic wish. I can't believe that you would go so far as to consume all those natural resources to build a bridge all the way to Hawaii. You need to think a little more paternalistic about this. The man thought for a minute. He said, okay, Lord, I wish that men could understand women. He said, I wish we could understand what they're really thinking when they say there's nothing wrong, or when they're sitting pensive in the living room, you know, what's really on their mind. If men could understand women, that would be my wish. And the Lord said, did you want that bridge 2 lanes or 4? So to lighten up the mood just a bit, I would like to introduce our panelists. You can see their biographies in your booklets, so we're not going to go too exhaustive into the bios, but we have a great panel discussion here today on investing in the future. Our member companies, again, build facilities for industries throughout the state of Montana, and we're always elated when companies decide they need to expand their facilities and hire construction companies. First, I'll introduce all 3 panelists at once, and then ask them one by one to come up to the podium, make their comments, and then hopefully we'll have some time for questions. Tom Walsh has been the president and CEO of Montana Rail Link for the past 13 years, and he's worked for the railroad since its inception more than 28 years ago. Previous to his current position, Tom served as Rail Link's chief financial officer. The company's based in Missoula, Montana, and is a Class II regional railroad that operates over 900 route miles of track in Montana and Idaho, and employs nearly 1,200 professional people. The company operates 82 locomotives, 1,100 rail cars, and in 2015 shipped 360,000 carloads of freight. And our next panelist will be Colby Tanner, who is the Assistant Vice President of Economic Development for the Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railroad Company, which we just heard from moments ago. Prior to joining BNSF, he spent 12 years leading strategic real estate initiatives at various divisions of Walmart stores. And you can read the rest of his bio in your booklets. Our third panelist today is Curt Pohl, who is the Vice President of Distribution for NorthWestern Energy, and is responsible for operations of NorthWestern's electric and natural gas distribution systems across Montana, South Dakota, and Nebraska. The company operates approximately 25,000 miles of electric distribution and approximately 7,000 miles of natural gas pipelines, serving 425,000 customers and in electric customers and 280,000 natural gas customers. So at this time, I would like Mr. Walsh to come forward, make some comments, and then we'll just follow in that order. Welcome, Tom Walsh.
Yeah, as Cary just said, I can't see a thing out there, so forgive me if I'm not making eye contact with anyone. I thought it would be interesting to talk first about Montana Rail Link, just generally. The topic is infrastructure constraints, but in order to really understand that, you need to understand Montana Rail Link. In the industry, we're considered to be a regional railroad, and many of you may find this interesting, but in the United States, there are 550 railroads. And there are 7 fairly large ones, BNSF being the largest of the 7, and then Montana Rail Link is number 8. So we're sizable in one regard, but we're so much smaller than the great big railroads. As we just heard, we operate over 900 miles, and we operate from Huntley, Montana, which is not far to the east from here, to Sandpoint, Idaho, and then we have trackage rights into Spokane. We're unique in that we're not like most regional and short-line railroads. We're really a short class 1, if you will. We haul basically the same types of freight, the same amount of freight as a BNSF would, or a UP or Norfolk Southern, or one of those big railroads. We just happen to do it over just a shorter number of miles. When you look at what our infrastructure is, it's a little bit unique, maybe to the to some of the various states in the United States, in that we travel from, we live in this wonderful state that has lots of mountains and has lots of streams and all sorts of obstacles in the way. And so our infrastructure is, lots of bridges. We have hundreds and hundreds of bridges. We have, I think, 15 tunnels, some of them very, very long. As many of you know, you go between Livingston and Bozeman, and you go right over the tunnel that the railroad, our main line is traversing. I think that tunnel is over 3,000 feet long. The Continental Divide between Helena and Elliston, we have another 3,500 foot tunnel. So we have lots of obstacles along the way, and that's one of the constraints. One of the big constraints, I guess, we have is how do we kind of get from point A to point B? And how do we do it efficiently and quickly? Because as you can imagine, if you're in the state of Nebraska or something like that, it's likely a straight shot. Easier to go 60 miles an hour than it would be if you're traveling between, let's say, Livingston and Bozeman, where you're going over a sizable mountain pass, and your train is going now, instead of going 60 miles an hour, the fastest you can go, even when you add two 4,400 horsepower locomotives to the existing four other locomotives on the consist, you still can only go 15, 16 miles an hour. Same thing over at Helena. Between Helena and Elliston, we go over the pass there, and it's even more significant, and I think our speeds there are 12, 14 miles an hour. So those are the kinds of constraints that we find. The other one of the other big constraints that we have is as somebody asked the question earlier to Matt Rose, double track, what's double track? And I think most people likely understand this, but maybe not, in that it's not like the freeway system. You don't have a westbound and an eastbound lane. What you have is one lane that's going from point A to point B, and every 10 to 15 miles you have a passing track. And so then you have this pretty elaborate system that's dispatched out of, in our case, out of Missoula, where there's folks in a control center that are basically trying to get trains going both ways. And so they're planning constantly, 24 hours a day, when a train is going to arrive at a certain location. So it leaves Laurel, Montana, which is a very large terminal, and it's heading towards Bozeman. Well, there's several different places along the way where that train can meet a train that's coming from Helena and trying to get to Laurel. These passing tracks or these sidings are expensive, and you can, if you're probably guessing, if you live in the state of Nebraska or somewhere that doesn't have a lot of obstacles, you might be able to put in a nice 8,000 foot passing track for a couple $1 million. So it's significant. But if you live in Montana and you're trying to put a passing track in between Garrison, Montana and Elliston, Montana before you get to the divide, that same length might cost you $6 or $7 or $8 million because you have all these obstacles in the way. So those are some of the constraints that we have that really kind of make us really think hard about where we invest our capital. Over the years, we are a smaller company, but we're still relatively sizable for the state of Montana. And just to give you some perspective, on any given year, we invest about $40 million in our infrastructure. And that is just to keep our infrastructure in the shape that it was the year before, and maybe make it a little bit better. So over the 28, 29 years that we've been in business, we've invested over $1 billion. So that's a big number for us. It's a small number from BNSF, but of course we have a lot fewer miles to deal with. The other thing that we do in terms of investing our capital is we invest in increasing our capacity. And many of you might have noticed that just west of town here, between Laurel and Park City, there's a looks like a brand new small rail yard. And that basically is an extension of Laurel Yard to help us to handle the new business that's come our way over the last many years. And over the last 5 years, we've invested about $40 million in additional ways to increase our capacity, and that's paid off. We've been able to increase our speeds along the way, and we've been able to increase our ability to move the products from point A to point B by about 23% just over the last year. So those investments are really paying off. The last thing I'd mention, and then I'll let the next panelist go. But the last thing I'd mention, which is a constraint of ours, and it's one that is an interesting one, especially if you work in the rail industry. You think we probably take it too much to heart, but back many moons ago when there was very few people living in this part of the world, and the railroads basically brought the folks to the west and settled, and there was a big push to get people to come out this way. There's nobody around us, right? So we built this railroad that went from somewhere in the Midwest out to the West Coast. And then as we did that, people settled, of course. And where did they settle? Well, they didn't settle a long ways away from the railroad because that was their transportation source. So they settled very, very close to the railroads. And now what we find is that people say things like, I can't believe the railroad is going right through the middle of town, and not realizing that we actually weren't in the middle of town, that the town built around us. So that has created lots of constraints for us as well, because we're dealing with all sorts of issues with going through populated areas. We try to do the best we can, but we understand that we're loud, and some of those things we have to do. We have to blow the whistle, we have to sound the horns and all those things, because we want to make sure that we're running a safe operation. But nonetheless, we know that causes issues for lots of residents. So that creates a constraint as well for us. So there's many things out there that living in Montana, there are constraints, but overall it's such a wonderful place to live that we work through all those constraints, and we're very happy to serve the great state of Montana. Thanks.
Help me welcome Colby Tanner from Burlington Northern Santa Fe Railway.
Thanks, Cary. In my short time with BNSF Railway, I've learned two things. The first would be brief. Railroaders do not have long attention spans. Number two is never follow the chairman of the board speaking. Not able to do the latter, I will try to do the former. My name is Colby Tanner. I head up the Economic Development Group at BNSF. Our charge is to put new rail users on the BNSF Railway. So we have a very strong team that covers the western United States for us. We have a very strong presence here in Montana. Justin Pearson heads that group up for us. Here. Some of the challenges that Montana faces right now are not unsolvable. As Matt said in his comments, Canada has done a really good job with their Pacific Gateway corridor in establishing some public-private partnerships, as well as involving communities in how they're shipping freight from one part of the country to another. And it's really a lesson that we should take to heart here. It's one that we're focused on at BNSF. In fact, we've started a program, or participating in a program called the Great Northern Corridor Coalition. It's very similar to what Canada has proposed, or is rather doing, where we're trying to reach out, come up with a study, come up with ways that we can do similar things, like shipping freight from one end to the other without disrupting the normal traffic patterns of citizens, trying to get some of our rail, as Tom said, out of the center of town, things of that nature. So it's definitely, we're just at the beginning stages of it. I think we've got $750,000 allocated to the effort, so we're in the study phase. But it's something that I think Montana definitely can benefit from and is participating in right now. But these are the types of discussions that we're going to have as we move forward and try to solve some of the issues that you're having, particularly here in Montana, with getting your resources out and abroad. We're here to help with that. My team's here to help with that, and we look forward to those conversations. Matt threw out a lot of statistics, and I'm not going to reiterate those for you. He stole a lot of the thunder, quite honestly. So I'm going to leave a lot of my time, hopefully, for questions that you all might have. Thank you.
Thank you, Colby. Next up is Curt Pohl with NorthWestern Energy. Welcome, Curt.
Thanks, Cary. And I'll try to be brief as well, but we do have quite a bit to talk about with electric and natural gas infrastructure. Just by way of background, Cary explained that we're a service provider of electric and natural gas across 3 states, Montana, South Dakota, and Nebraska. We do operate a fairly significant grid when you look at the electric grid and so forth. I'm going to focus my comments on the transmission and distribution infrastructure. We do a lot with generation. Quite honestly, we've done a lot over the last few years, especially with the acquisition of our hydro facilities and the investments that we've made in generation across our service territory. But often what gets overlooked is the investments that we're making in the transmission and distribution infrastructure. We're a very unique utility in the form of Montana. We have a lot of similar issues that Tom explained. When you look at Montana and the vast geography, we serve about 85,000 square miles. We have about 17,000 miles of distribution infrastructure on the electric side, about 7,500 miles of transmission infrastructure. And you can imagine the exposure that we have when you look at the population that we serve. One of the unique things that NorthWestern has to face is that we're a very rural utility. While we have some larger cities, I always like to say that 2/3 of our infrastructure serves about 1/3 of our customers. In fact, on average, if you look at our customer density on a per mile basis, we serve about 14 customers per mile. There's not a lot of investor-owned utilities that have that same issues. What's impressive to me is that even though we have that rural nature, the reliability that we provide to our average customers is actually quite high. On average, on the electric side, our customers are out of power on an average of about 2 hours a year, which is extremely high reliability, actually near first quartile when you look at that amongst our peers. And again, it's the people that make that happen. We man about 60 locations in Montana, so we have a lot of small town managers and a lot of small towns, and those men and women do an extraordinary job of keeping the lights on and the gas flowing across the state. One of the things that we've been doing and the challenges that we face, really not unlike most utilities, is aging infrastructure. A lot of our infrastructure was put in the 50s through the 70s, and about 10 years ago, we recognized that the fact that a lot of those assets were going to reach the end of their useful life. In fact, in 2009, we formed a stakeholder group which helped us develop a infrastructure project that we call the Distribution System Infrastructure Project, and we've been working that plan over the last several years. One of the things that we predicted was if we didn't attack aging infrastructure, we were going to be in a much more reactive mode. So what we did was took a programmatic approach to investing in changing out poles, replacing underground cable, and over the last 5 years, we've spent nearly $200 million just in that effort alone. But the second thing that we did was we adopted a platform to invest in new technology and automation so that we could set up our infrastructure for the next generation of technology. And I'll come back to that in a minute and why that's important in today's environment. On the transmission side, a lot of our investment's been to upgrade capacity and reliability issues. If you've drove down the Gallatin Valley lately in the canyon, you see the big project that we have going on with the Big Sky Jackrabbit project. That's been a significant project for us, as well as this year we'll kick off another project that's going to be a transmission upgrade from Columbus to Chrome Junction, which will serve the Stillwater mine, but also the surrounding areas. The other area that we've invested a lot is compliance, and we have challenges of ongoing regulation, ongoing investment that's necessary just to comply with rules. And while they're good, it's obviously something we have to stay ahead of and stay focused on. So a lot of the investment we've made in our transmission area and the electric side has been just that, to comply with NERC rules and so on and so forth. But, you know, just to wrap up kind of what we've done over the last few years, we've actually invested nearly $600 million on the electric side. Now going forward, what we're going to need to do is adapt our infrastructure to this environment. Systems on the electric side were traditionally and basically designed to flow energy one direction. So you can imagine we got central generation sources flowing through transmission, flowing through distribution to end users. In today's world, with distributed generation popping up in a lot of places, we have to be able to be ahead of that and put systems in place, automation in place, that we can basically adopt or integrate distributed generation so that we can manage that energy flow. And I know that sounds kind of simple, but it's really not. It means that we have to invest in distribution management systems, we have to upgrade our technology and our substations, and a lot of challenges that we have going forward. It's going to take investment in order to be able to adapt and integrate that. So I'll talk a little bit about the gas side. Likewise, on the gas side, we've invested a lot over the past few years, and mainly on the gas side, it's all about providing safe, reliable gas. And so a lot of our investment is basically making sure that we're maintaining the pipelines, the mains, the services that are already in place today. I mentioned the DSIP project. One of the things in the DSIP project we did was we invested a lot in our historic business districts, and we upgraded all of our facilities in the historic downtowns, which were traditionally several years old, and basically refurbished them block by block. So that'll set those systems up for the future. Again, looking back toward the future in the natural gas side, a lot of it has to do with just making sure we're keeping up with capacity, making sure those systems are safe, using technology and the data to identify any high risks that we have so that we're ahead of those and replacing infrastructure as it's necessary. Most natural gas systems, if they're well maintained, last a very long time through corrosion control, other things, literally last indefinitely. So it's more important on the gas side just to monitor what's going on and investing in capacity upgrades and so forth. So with that, I guess I'll leave it for questions.
Okay, while the folks in the audience are formulating your questions, there are some wireless microphones, I think, wandering around the room. So, but I thought as I was listening to each of the panelists talking about their forethought that goes into investing in their infrastructure to serve customers, that there's a real connection to public infrastructure and how public officials might plan for the infrastructure needs throughout the state of Montana. We have a number of elected officials here in the room. We have a number of candidates for elected office in the room. And I wonder if each panelist, starting with Tom, might just offer some guidance, maybe some advice to the public sector infrastructure needs and how public officials might take the lead from some of the companies that look ahead and invest in infrastructure. Put you on the spot a little bit. Tom.
Can you hear from here? Or you want me to go up? You can hear from here, okay. Well, I wish that question would have come to me earlier. I had time to think about it. You know, I think what jumps out at me, I guess, is that trying to be helpful versus finding the ways to make it work versus finding the ways for it not to work. And that, I know that's not saying a ton here, but that does happen from time to time. You'll have maybe an elected official that will maybe not be in favor of moving one product over another. Maybe they're not in favor of coal, as an example. So rather than trying to work to figure out how we can do something, it's more looking at how we can maybe be an obstructionist and be in the way of doing that. And I think that does become dangerous. I think we don't want to pick and choose here. think we want to let the market decide what moves and what doesn't. So that's what first comes to mind to me.
Can you guys hear me? Okay. So I would just kind of bolt on to what Tom said. I think being proactive comes to mind for me. It's, you know, I have the ability to go throughout the Western United States and see what different communities are doing. And in reality, what's going on is every community is in competition with another community for business growth, for company relocations, for company expansion. And those communities that are out there actively trying to attract companies stand out and are heads and shoulders above those who aren't. So I would say being proactive, and that goes from seeking out companies, getting a plan, being very organized in your approach to attracting businesses would be key. The other thing would then be putting money and resources into infrastructure. If you have an industrial park, making sure that it's keyed up for when that big user comes in to look at sites, that you have product to show them. The other part of that, outside of being proactive, is on our team in the Economic Development Department of BNSF. We are constantly preaching three things. That when we deal with companies, when we deal with communities, that we want our team to be responsive, we want them to be transparent, and we want them to be collaborative. And I think if you've got those three things, you can usually work through just about any issue. And that's, I think, what companies are wanting whenever they come to your town to see if they can make an investment there.
Well, I don't know that I have a whole lot to add over what Tom and Colby had said, but you know, as providers of key infrastructure and essential infrastructure, the investment in that is extremely important. We need to maintain a very robust and reliable electric and natural gas infrastructure. It's vital to the economic growth and vital to keeping high-paying jobs in Montana. One of the things that we face is a lot of our infrastructure is there. It doesn't matter whether you know, you're a customer that has rooftop solar or you're a customer that doesn't. We have fixed infrastructure, and it requires the same infrastructure to most of those companies or most of those customers and so forth. So in order to keep up with the changing environment, you know, we've got issues where we got to figure out a way to recover fixed costs, and that can become challenging. And so obviously we need regulators. We need to work together so that we can balance the interests of all stakeholders, and it's going to be important for regulation to keep up.
Okay, time for questions from the audience. Anybody have a question? We have two right next to each other. Ladies first. There we go.
Thank you very much for the opportunity to come and listen to you all today. I'm Maureen Davey, Commissioner, Stillwater County, and I'm glad you mentioned about the lines extending to the Stillwater mine, because at times they didn't get all the power they needed. And Stillwater mine not only is important to Stillwater County, but all the surrounding areas because of the jobs that they have and also the taxes they pay throughout the state. But Curt, I wondered if you could expand on Mystic Lake Dam. And now they're considering it to be a renewable resource, where in the past it wasn't. Could you expand on that a little bit?
I guess that's directed at you, Curt, probably.
Well, I'm just a distribution guy, so I'm not sure I can answer that question. Actually, and there are people in the audience that are probably better equipped to answer that question, but I'd just say it like this, that hydro was, as you look at, obviously it's a renewable resource, but when you look at it in the context of meeting RPS standards and so forth, it's not considered a renewable resource in the efforts to meet those standards because it's something that's legacy. Whether that will change or not, remains in terms of, what goes forward in terms of policy, so forth. But I'm not sure I really answered your question, but in essence, the reason it's not considered a renewable resource by standards is just simply because it was built before RPS standards were put in place.
Other questions?
Cary. Cary.
Okay, okay.
I'd like to ask Tom, what percentage of ag products versus petroleum products does Montana Rail Link carry?
Egg products is becoming our number one commodity. Coal was our number one commodity in 2014 and 2015, but 2016 it appears that egg will definitely overtake coal, and petroleum is quite a ways down the line. So I don't have the exact percentages, but I would just tell you that ag would be number one, coal 2. Petroleum products probably number 3.
Other questions? Right here.
For Curt, you've mentioned that centralized power and distributed power present some challenges for you. I know there's a lot of other states that are tackling that a lot more quickly, and I'm kind of curious how long you think you need in order to put proper things in place to be able to handle distributed power.
Well, in a lot of respects, we've already built a foundation. One of the things I mentioned was that we've invested a lot in automation. One of the things that we did through our DSIP plan was to build that foundation, and we invested in a communication network. We actually bought Spectrum, which was a space in the essentially a 200 megahertz and a 700 megahertz blocks of communication space, so it allows us to communicate point to point, point to multi-point, which is going to open up a lot of avenues for us in terms of automation. So in a lot of respects, we've already built that foundation. In terms of timing, we like to use the term basically investing at the speed of value. So we have to carefully monitor and figure out when we're going to have the cost benefits and so forth. So timing is a tough question because we want to make sure that we're staying ahead of things. We're seeing a lot of solar activity today coming on to our distribution systems that we didn't have even just a year ago. So it's something that we clearly are aware of, and looking at distribution management systems. I don't see us being behind the curve. It's just something that we have to be cognizant of and make sure that we're applying the right resources to meet that challenge.
Okay. Another question over here.
Yes. It's on? We're good? I'm Representative Kathy Kelger from Billings, and I have a question that's kind of a follow-up, Curt, to what you were just discussing. Would you give me your assessment as someone who's in distribution of the state of the entire electric grid? NorthWestern doesn't control the entire grid. What does it look like in the big picture?
Well, that's a tough question. Good question, though. I think that, in general, as I stated, aging infrastructure is a key issue in the entire industry. The amount of investment that has to go in to replace infrastructure to just fundamentally meet the core needs. And you couple that with the other challenges that we have by building those systems differently, the amount of investment that's required obviously is well above depreciation, which puts upward pressure on rates inevitably. And so those are the challenges. But I think in general, the electric grid, if you will, and I look at reliability statistics nationally, because I compare our reliability to the reliability. There's definitely pockets in the U.S. that have more problems than others. Basically those that have that have higher penetration of distributed resources that are coming on faster than they could keep up with. You know, they've got those challenges as well. But in general, you know, the electric grid, and I advance that more to transmission and distribution, has done a phenomenal job in this country of providing really strong reliability and maintaining electric costs very reasonably.
Okay, another question over here.
Both of you, all of you guys have lots of rights of way and easements. And my evaluation of the national grid is that we don't have enough interstate high voltage infrastructure. And it seems to me that we have a lot of rail lines that go interstate. And as spoken earlier, is that regulatory environment is horrible to try to site a new transmission line. Have you thought about the railroad business getting into the high voltage transmission line corridor business?
Colby, that looks like that's teed up for you.
So I don't know if I can answer your question specifically. We have looked at various mechanisms to use that right of way for different things. Obviously, we have to be careful because public safety is of utmost concern and number one concern. But is there an opportunity to use some of that railroad right of way? I think absolutely. It just has to be done in a very smart and thought out way. Curt, I don't know if you guys, or Tom, if you guys have thought about that.
Sounds like there's a partnership here then.
Yeah, you know,
Tom,
I would just echo just the same, in that you know, we do with fiber optics and other types of transmission that actually is happening today, and that does we do use the railway right away. So I'm not sure to what extent that's used with other transmission lines in the United States. I'm just not familiar with it.
Curt, any other thoughts on the question? It's an interesting question.
It's an interesting concept. I don't know that, you know, we specifically, but you are absolutely right that citing, it doesn't really matter whether it's transmission line, gas or electric or distribution for that matter, but siting is becoming more and more of a problem. And so looking for alternatives is certainly something that, you know, I think everybody, and again, it gets back to the concept of working together.
We have about 5 minutes for further questions. If we have another one, there's one back here.
My question is for Tom Walsh. As you're aware, one of the battles in the war on coal over the last several years has been the allegations about fugitive dust from coal trains, and that's been raised in communities Bozeman, Helena, Missoula, and Spokane. I'm curious from your response, how has the railroads and or the coal producers responded to those allegations about health risks to the communities that you transport coal through?
Well, good question. It's an interesting one in that, you know, we certainly take that very seriously. And what happened in Missoula, I don't know how many years ago it was now. It's within the last, let's say, 5 to 6 years, it seems. The health department on their own went out and did a study specifically in the Missoula area to determine if there was coal dust. And there was there's been all sorts of discussions about this coal dust being out there and being such a terrible thing. And so, you know, we welcomed that, and we were very interested to see what the results of that study would be, something that we weren't involved in. We didn't participate financially in putting the study together, nor did we didn't ask for it either. It was something that was asked for by the community. And the results of that study came back, and they were printed in our local paper in a very small place in the 3rd section, I think, basically saying there wasn't an issue. I mean, the study went out specifically looking for, was coal dust a problem? And so I think they came back saying if we weren't asked to look at coal dust, we wouldn't even have come back with any reading at all on coal dust. But what they did come back with was there's some de minimis levels. But the biggest piece of particulate, I believe, that was in the air, and this has been a number of years since I've read the study, but it was basically it was rubber from tires. So it was the freeway system, the highways, the roads in the city, and that was what was getting into the air more than any kind of coal dust. So what we have done as an industry, both the coal industry and the rail industry has been involved in making sure that the coal cars have been sprayed with a surfactant which keeps any kind of coal dust down. So that's been taking place for years and years now. I don't really see it as a big issue, honestly, but it's one that we will fight forever, likely, because it's just an easy one to get people riled up about.
Okay, I guess we have time for one more question.
Hi, I'm John Porterfield. I live in Whitefish, and Whitefish has the luxury of Amtrak passenger services. About 70,000 people a year get off the train there. It seems like there's a great economic development opportunity as we're talking about the future of rail travel. What is the possibility of bringing passenger services back to the southern tier of Montana?
So
We'll
that's
throw
probably-
that to
that's
Colby.
probably for-
Maybe
you
throw that to Colby first. And
Matt
Tom?
eagerly kicked this question to you yesterday, Tom. so.
Right.
I would say that there needs to be a need, number one. So if there was a need, that would definitely be something we would consider at BNSF. We're great partners with Amtrak, but really ultimately I think they have to have a business case in order to make the investment in order to do that. But as far as BNSF is concerned, is it possible? Absolutely. I think it just goes back to, is there a need and what that business case looks like for Amtrak.
Yeah, if you want me to just add to that, I mean, it's certainly something that we've looked at because it's our line you're talking about. It's something that we're certainly interested in talking to Amtrak and others about. It doesn't feel like something that, to be brutally honest, it doesn't feel like something that makes sense. There's a couple reasons why. I mean, first, it's incredibly expensive, and so it's going to have to be subsidized very heavily. Secondly, and maybe even more importantly, and I don't know if this is the way others feel or not, but we feel like we're really fast in terms of how we get from point A to point B. And just to let we've all driven from here to Helena as an example, and the fastest we go, if we're just screaming across the territory, we're going to get from point A to point B in somewhere a little over 6 hours, and sometimes it's 12. And so if the person that I've always thought that the person that gets on the train in Missoula and wants to go to Billings, and they realize that, wow, I could have driven there in 4.5 or 5 hours instead of taking 18 hours to do it, or whatever the number would be. I think they'll do that once and maybe twice, and then they'll say, I'm going to do that. I'm going to be different. I'm going to do that differently. So we don't have a high-speed corridor, as I was talking earlier, where we go over mountains and around rivers and streams, and it just takes us a while to get across. So I don't think it's very practical as a long-term solution for passengers.
Some great questions and a great panel, but before I ask you to thank the panel, I wanted to just mention the individual who asked the question about the coal dust is a good friend of mine, Bud Clinch. And I happen to know that his birthday is today. He's 65 years old, so let's give him a big congratulations. So with that, let's thank this great panel discussion, and we'll ask Senator Daines to come back up. But thank you, panelists. Excellent.
One of the committees I serve on in the United States Senate is the Energy and Resources Committee. And when I heard that hydropower was not considered a renewable resource, that's only an idea that could be made up by a bunch of Washington, D.C. inside the Beltway thinkers. And so I'm glad we had a chance to have that discussion with that panel. And by the way, the energy bill that sits in front of the United States Senate at the moment, we've got a few obstacles trying to get that passed. It actually redefines hydro as being a renewable resource. So believe it or not, we're starting to make some progress. Well, it's my privilege next to introduce to you the President and CEO of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Institute for 21st Century Energy, Cary Herbert. Karen leads the Chamber of Commerce Institute's effort to build support for meaningful energy action nationally and internationally through policy development, through education, as well as advocacy. Karen's the former Assistant Secretary for Policy and International Affairs at the U.S. Department of Energy and was the primary policy advisor to the Secretary of Energy and to the Department on Domestic and International Energy Issues. Karen also served as Vice Chairman of the International Energy Agency, which advises its 28 member nations on energy policy issues and orchestrates international responses to energy supply disruptions. Please join me in welcoming Karen to Montana and Montana Energy.